Ethan never imagined that the quiet college town where he had moved would feel so alive with temptation. At 23, freshly graduated, he was young enough to still feel restless, yet old enough to want something more than fleeting hookups and meaningless nights. He had always been ambitious, always hungry for experience. What he didn't expect was that his next lesson would come not from books, but from a woman whose very presence unsettled him. Her name was Clara Matthews. She was the kind of woman who seemed to carry gravity with her, like the world bent slightly to accommodate her presence. A teacher in her late 30s, sharp-eyed and poised, Clara had an elegance that Ethan couldn't ignore. It wasn't about conventional beauty alone, though she had that, too. It was the way she looked at people, as though she could see straight through their defenses, past their words, into their hidden cravings. He first saw her at the faculty mixer, a small gathering hosted by the college where he was taking evening courses. Ethan wasn't even supposed to be there. He was invited as a student rep, almost by accident, but once inside the dimly lit hall, filled with laughter, murmurs, and the clink of glasses, his attention locked on her. Clara was speaking with two other lecturers, her hand loosely holding a glass of wine, her laughter rich but controlled. She wore a dark green dress that fit close around her waist, modest but devastating in the way it suggested curves without flaunting them. Ethan caught himself staring longer than he should have. She noticed. Her gaze slid toward him, not rushed, not accidental, but deliberate, like a test. His chest tightened when her eyes held his, sharp and unreadable. She tilted her head slightly, acknowledging his existence, before turning back to her colleagues. It was only a few seconds, but he felt it. The air between them had changed. Later that evening, when most of the guests had left, Ethan lingered near the library entrance, pretending to scroll his phone. Clara stepped out, alone. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice calm, carrying the authority of someone used to control. Ethan looked up, caught between amusement and embarrassment. "And yet, here I am." Her lips curved, not quite a smile. "Careful. That's how most trouble begins." Something in her tone struck him, not a warning, but an invitation wrapped in caution. He couldn't help himself. "Maybe I like trouble." Clara's eyes narrowed, appraising him like he was a paper she needed to grade. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then she stepped closer, her perfume subtle jasmine and spice pulling him in. "You're younger than you think you are," she said softly. "And I am not the kind of lesson you're ready for." Her words should have dismissed him, but instead they burned into his mind. She walked away, heels tapping against the polished floor, leaving him with a racing heart and the certainty that this wouldn't be their last conversation. Over the next weeks, Ethan found excuses. Clara lectured occasionally in the same building where his evening courses were held, and somehow, his timing always aligned with hers. He'd pass her in the hallway, exchange brief greetings, steal glances. She rarely gave him more than a nod, but her restraint only fueled his fascination. Clara carried herself like a queen ruling unseen kingdoms. She never rushed, never raised her voice, yet everyone around her seemed to yield space without realizing it. One evening, Ethan dared to stay behind after class, knowing she would be finishing her lecture down the hall. When the last of the students left, he lingered in the doorway, watching her gather her notes. "You're persistent," she said without looking up. "Or curious," he offered. Finally, she met his gaze. "Curiosity has its price. Then maybe I'm willing to pay it." Her eyes softened, not in kindness, but in intrigue. She studied him like one might examine a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit but promised a larger picture. "You don't even know what you're asking for," Clara murmured. Ethan stepped closer, emboldened by something he couldn't name. "Then show me." The silence between them grew thick. She didn't move, didn't blink, and for a second he thought he'd gone too far. But then, with deliberate grace, she closed her folder and set it aside. "You really don't know the kind of doors you're knocking on," she whispered. The first time he went to her house was a stormy Friday night. Rain streaked against the windows as he followed her inside, nerves and excitement colliding in his chest. The house was elegant, minimal but warm, filled with bookshelves, soft lighting, and the faint scent of sandalwood. Clara poured them both wine without asking, then sat across from him on the couch. She crossed her legs slowly, her dress sliding just enough to distract him. "You want to play with fire," she said, her voice measured, "but you don't even know how close you're standing to it." "I can handle it," Ethan replied, though his pulse betrayed him. Clara leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Can you?" She set down her glass, then reached out, fingers brushing against his wrist. The touch was light, yet it felt like a chain binding him in place. "You don't follow rules well, do you?" she asked. "Not always." Her lips curved, this time into something sharper. "Then perhaps it's time you learned." The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling through the walls. Clara rose, commanding the space without effort, and Ethan realized this was no ordinary attraction. She wasn't simply a teacher, and he wasn't simply a student. This was something else. Something dangerous. Something that could consume him whole. That night didn't end in the obvious way. She didn't kiss him. She didn't take him to bed. Instead, she set boundaries, rules. She told him what she expected: discipline, respect, honesty. "If you step into this with me," Clara said, standing tall in the dim light, "you don't get to play the boy. You'll obey. You'll listen. And if you can't, then we end it here." Ethan's throat was dry, his body tense with need, but his mind was clearer than ever. He knew this was more than seduction, it was initiation. And he said yes. Clara's eyes glinted with approval, though she betrayed nothing else. She only nodded once, like a queen acknowledging a new subject. "Then, Ethan," she whispered, "class is in session." The stormy night stayed with Ethan long after he left Clara's house. He walked back under the drizzle, heart racing, replaying every word she'd spoken. She hadn't kissed him, hadn't touched him beyond that deliberate brush of her fingers against his wrist, but the sensation haunted him more than any fleeting embrace he'd ever known. It was control. Measured, deliberate control. She gave nothing more than what she wanted, and it was enough to unravel him. Days passed with a strange rhythm. In class, he could barely focus, his thoughts circling back to her. He found himself scanning the hallways for her sharp figure, the click of her heels. Every glimpse felt like a secret reminder of what lay beneath her calm surface. And yet, she didn't seek him out. If anything, Clara behaved as though nothing had happened. No special smiles, no lingering touches. To the rest of the world, she was the same, disciplined, composed, untouchable. Ethan began to wonder if he'd imagined it. But then, a single folded note appeared inside his textbook one evening. Saturday. 8 p.m. Don't be late. No signature. No address. Just confidence. And of course, he knew exactly where to go. Clara opened the door that Saturday in a silk blouse, black slacks, and bare feet. It was a softer look than the sharp dresses she wore in public, but somehow even more disarming. "You're on time," she said, stepping aside. "That's a start." Ethan entered, his chest tightening with anticipation. "Sit," Clara instructed, gesturing to the couch. He obeyed. She poured wine again but didn't hand him his glass until she'd explained the rules. "Last time, I told you there are conditions if you want to keep standing at my door," she began, pacing slowly. "Tonight, you'll learn the first." Her voice was low, steady, impossible to ignore. "Rule number 1, when you're here, you do as I say. No arguments. No hesitation. If you can't trust me enough for that, leave now." Ethan's throat felt dry. "And if I stay?" Her lips curved, just slightly. "Then you learn." The evening unfolded like a lesson disguised as temptation. Clara didn't throw herself at him, didn't try to seduce him the way Ethan half expected. Instead, she tested his patience. She asked him to wait, to sit quietly while she read a passage aloud from one of her books. She told him to fetch her a pen from the desk, just to see how quickly he would obey. It was maddening and intoxicating. Every time he followed an instruction, Clara's approval was subtle, a nod, a glance, the faintest trace of satisfaction on her lips. Every time he hesitated, her silence felt heavier than any scolding. Ethan realized he wanted her approval more than anything. By the time the evening ended, he was buzzing with frustration and desire. Clara had drawn so close once, brushing past him as she reached for a book, her hand grazing his shoulder, yet she left him untouched when she dismissed him. "Good night, Ethan," she said softly at the door. "Think about why you came here." And she closed it, leaving him with more questions than answers. Weeks blurred. Their meetings became routine, each one pushing him deeper into her orbit. Sometimes she would have him sit at her desk while she wrote, making him wait in silence until she acknowledged him. Sometimes she would ask him personal questions about his ambitions, his fears, his past relationships, and dissect his answers like a teacher grading an essay. It wasn't just attraction anymore. Clara was shaping him, molding him into something he couldn't quite define. And Ethan wanted more. One evening, emboldened, he asked, "Why me?" Clara looked up from her glass, her eyes sharp. "Why do you think?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I feel like you could have anyone. Someone older. Someone who isn't me." She leaned forward, her gaze pinning him in place. "Do you think this is about age? About convenience?" He swallowed. "Isn't it?" Her laugh was soft, but edged. "You really don't understand yet. It's not about who's older, Ethan. It's about who listens. Who's willing to let go. Most men your age chase control. You crave surrender." The words hit him like a secret exposed. He wanted to protest, but she was right. Every fiber of him buzzed with the truth of it. Clara reached across the table, her hand finally resting on his cheek. It was the first real intimacy she'd allowed. "That," she whispered, "is why you're here." Their first kiss wasn't sweet. It wasn't gentle. It was deliberate. Clara kissed him like she owned the right to, like she was reminding him of the rules she'd already laid down. Ethan melted under her, the frustration of weeks collapsing into that single moment. When she pulled back, her lips still brushing his, she whispered, "Rule number 2, you don't take. You wait until I give." And Ethan understood that the kiss wasn't his victory. It was hers. As winter deepened, so did their entanglement. Ethan spent nights replaying her words, her touches, her silences. He grew addicted not to passion alone, but to the structure she wove around him. Clara was no longer just a woman he desired. She was a mirror, showing him parts of himself he hadn't known existed. But with addiction came fear. One night, after another charged encounter, he blurted out, "What happens when someone finds out?" "When the college." Clara silenced him with a glance. "Rule number 3, never speak of this outside these walls." Her tone carried no room for negotiation. Ethan nodded, realizing that secrecy was now part of the bond. But secrecy came with risk. And risk, with consequence. It was during one of these evenings, in the dim glow of her study, that Clara's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and for the first time since Ethan had known her, a flicker of something unsettled her composure. He watched her read the message, her expression unreadable. "Is everything okay?" he asked. Clara set the phone down slowly. "An old friend," she said simply. "Someone who understands." There was a weight in her words, something Ethan couldn't place. "Will I meet them?" he asked before he could stop himself. Clara's lips curved again, but this smile was different, private, secretive. "Perhaps," she murmured. "If you're ready." Ethan's heart pounded, torn between anticipation and dread. The thought of another person stepping into their hidden world unsettled him, but the curiosity burned hotter. Clara rose, walking to the window, her silhouette sharp against the night. "You've learned obedience," she said softly, almost to herself. "But desire isn't meant to be contained by two alone. One day soon, Ethan, you'll learn that." Her reflection in the glass caught his, and in that look, he knew, his lessons had only just begun. The winter air bit sharp against Ethan's skin as he walked to Clara's house. Weeks had turned into months, and what once felt like a dangerous flirtation had grown into a secret routine. He knew the path by heart, the weight of anticipation filling his chest each time he approached her door. But that night, something felt different. The lights inside glowed warmer than usual, and when Clara opened the door, her smile wasn't just sharp, it was amused. "You're late," she said. Ethan frowned, checking his watch. "I'm 2 minutes early." "Exactly," Clara replied, stepping aside. "Punctuality is obedience. Obedience isn't just about doing what I say, it's about anticipating it." He opened his mouth to argue but caught himself. Instead, he lowered his eyes, the way she liked, and stepped inside. Only then did he notice the second glass of wine on the table. Ethan's pulse spiked. Another presence. He turned, and there she was. A woman, seated on Clara's couch as though she'd been there 100 times. She had short dark hair, a sharp jawline softened by a teasing smile, and eyes that scanned him with the same deliberate precision Clara's always did. "This is Isabel," Clara said casually, as if introducing an old friend at a dinner party. "She's familiar with the rules." Isabel rose gracefully, offering her hand. "So you're the student." The word stung, but it thrilled him too. He took her hand, noticing the confidence in her grip, firm, unapologetic. Ethan stammered, glancing at Clara for guidance. "Don't mumble," Clara cut in smoothly. "Speak clearly, or don't speak at all." "Yes, Clara," Ethan said quickly. Isabel's grin widened. "Oh, I see why you like him." The evening unfolded differently than any before. Clara didn't focus solely on him, instead, She and Isabel spoke like two conspirators catching up after years apart. Ethan sat there, feeling at once invisible and exposed, every word they exchanged weaving tension tighter around him. Occasionally, Clara would glance at him, sharp and assessing. Sometimes Isabel would throw him a playful smirk, like she knew secrets about him he hadn't confessed yet. Rule number 4, Clara finally said, her voice slicing through the thick air. When others are present, you don't look at me unless I give permission. Ethan blinked, startled. His gaze instinctively shifted toward her, but she raised a single brow. Heat crawled up his neck as he dropped his eyes to the floor. Isabel chuckled. Oh, he's sweet. Too sweet. Are you sure you want to break him? Clara sipped her wine. He isn't here to be broken. He's here to learn. Ethan's breath caught. Their words felt less like conversation and more like threads of a web being spun around him. As the night deepened, Clara tested him further. Fetch Isabel another drink, she instructed. He obeyed, careful not to spill. Sit on the floor, she said later, and he did, aware of Isabel's gaze lingering on him with open amusement. Every command was simple, almost mundane but layered with something more. Ethan felt stripped bare, not by touch, but by the way their attention framed him, controlled, studied, desired. At one point, Isabel leaned forward, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. The touch was light, but her voice carried weight. He listens well, she said to Clara. Clara's reply was measured. He listens because he knows what happens if he doesn't. Ethan shivered, equal parts fear and arousal. When Isabel finally left, the air in the room shifted. Clara stood at the window, watching her car disappear into the night, before turning back to Ethan. You're unsettled, she observed. He hesitated. I didn't expect her. You didn't expect me, either, Clara said evenly. That's different. Is it? Ethan struggled for words. With you, I know where I stand. With her, I don't. Clara stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. She tilted his chin up with two fingers, forcing his eyes to hers. That's because you're still clinging to the illusion of control, she whispered. You want predictability. Safety. But desire doesn't live in safety, Ethan. It lives in risk. Her grip tightened, just slightly, a reminder of the line he had chosen to cross months ago. Isabel is not a threat, Clara continued. She is, possibility. Another layer. Another lesson. Ethan's chest heaved, his body caught between defiance and surrender. Finally, he nodded. Clara released him, her expression unreadable. Good. Because she will return. And when she does, you'll show me you've learned. The days that followed were restless. Ethan found himself distracted by thoughts of Isabel, the sharpness of her smile, the way she'd looked at him as though peeling back his skin. Clara already consumed his every thought, but now Isabel's presence lingered too, like a shadow in the corner of his mind. When he returned to Clara's house the following week, Isabel was there again. This time, Clara didn't make introductions. She simply gestured for Ethan to kneel by the couch as the two women talked above him. He listened, heart pounding, every laugh, every pause, every brush of silence between them sparking against his nerves. Do you enjoy watching him squirm? Isabel asked at one point, her tone playful. Of course, Clara replied calmly. But more than that, I enjoy watching him learn. And Ethan realized this wasn't about him alone anymore. He wasn't just Clara's student. He was part of something larger, a dynamic he couldn't control, only surrender to. The night ended with Clara's final instruction. Rule number 5, when Isabel is here, she speaks with my voice. Her words are my words. You will treat them the same. Ethan's breath hitched. His eyes darted between them, seeing the shared glint of amusement, the shared control. Yes, Clara, he whispered. Clara's smile was slow, deliberate. Isabel's was sharper, edged with promise. And Ethan knew, his lessons were no longer just between him and Clara. A third shadow had entered their world, and there was no turning back. Ethan's body had grown used to Clara's rules. Sit. Wait. Obey. But his mind? His mind was a battlefield. Every time he left her house, his thoughts spun out of control. He told himself he was still free, still making choices. But deep down, he knew Clara had already reshaped him. And Isabel's presence only twisted the knife deeper. The third time Isabel joined them, Clara didn't let Ethan sit on the couch. She directed him to the floor with a single pointed look. Kneel, she commanded, her voice smooth but sharp. He obeyed instantly, the carpet rough against his knees. Isabel laughed softly, circling him like a predator circling prey. You've trained him well. He trains himself, Clara corrected. I simply provide the framework. Ethan's heart hammered as Isabel crouched in front of him, her eyes locking onto his. And do you like it? She asked, her voice low. His throat went dry. Yes. Clara's voice cut through the air. Yes, what? Ethan swallowed hard. Yes, Clara. Approval flickered across Clara's face. Isabel smirked. That night blurred into a haze of commands and silences, of Clara and Isabel weaving around him like two forces of nature. They didn't touch him much, barely at all, but the tension was unbearable. Every look, every pause, every instruction sent heat coursing through his veins. And yet, jealousy burned in him too. When Isabel laughed with Clara, when Clara's hand brushed Isabel's arm, when their eyes locked with familiarity, Ethan couldn't cheer, it twisted something sharp inside him. At one point, he dared to speak without permission. Do you two have history? Silence. The question hung in the air like a crime. Clara turned her gaze on him, slow and deliberate. Rule number 6, she said coldly. You don't ask questions you aren't prepared to hear the answer to. Ethan's stomach dropped. Isabel raised a brow, amused. Touchy subject. Clara ignored her, stepping closer to Ethan until he felt her shadow swallow him whole. You let jealousy speak, she murmured, her eyes burning into his. And jealousy is weakness. I'm sorry, he whispered. Clara tilted her head. Sorry is empty without action. Her hand gripped his jaw firmly, forcing his head back. You'll prove it. The proof came in the form of silence. Clara ordered him to kneel for the rest of the evening while she and Isabel carried on as though he wasn't there. They drank wine. They laughed. They spoke of books, travel, old friends. Every now and then, Isabel would glance at him with a wicked smile, reminding him of his place. His knees ached, his muscles trembled, but Ethan stayed. Because leaving wasn't an option. Not anymore. When Clara finally dismissed Isabel hours later, she turned to Ethan, her expression unreadable. You endured, she said softly. But endurance isn't enough. You must learn patience without resentment. Service without pride. Surrender without condition. Her fingers brushed his hair back from his forehead, gentle after hours of denial. If you can't do that, Ethan, you don't belong here. Tears pricked his eyes not from pain, but from the unbearable mix of shame and longing. I can, he whispered. I will. Clara's lips curved, satisfied. Good. Then we continue. The following week, Clara escalated. She and Isabel waited for him together, their presence heavier than ever. Clara handed him a simple black ribbon. Tonight, you wear this. Ethan stared at it, confused. What for? Clara raised a brow. Did I give you permission to ask? Heat rushed to his face. He lowered his eyes, tied the ribbon around his wrist as instructed. Every time you look where you shouldn't, speak when you shouldn't, hesitate when you shouldn't, Clara explained, Isabel will tighten the knot. When it cuts off your circulation, you'll remember why obedience matters. Isabel grinned, fingers already itching. This will be fun. The night became a blur of lessons. Every slip, every flicker of defiance, every stolen glance earned him a sharp tug on the ribbon. Isabel enjoyed it too much, her laughter filling the room each time Ethan flinched. Clara, in contrast, remained composed, her control unshakable. She was the architect, Isabel the enforcer. By the end, Ethan's wrist throbbed, the ribbon cutting deep. Clara untied it slowly, inspecting the angry marks it left behind. Pain fades, she whispered, her fingers brushing his skin. But the lesson remains. Doesn't it? Yes, Clara, he breathed. Good. But even as his obedience deepened, so did his turmoil. That night, lying awake in his own bed, Ethan's thoughts spiraled. Why Isabel? Why bring her in? Was Clara testing him, or was there something between them he would never be part of? The jealousy gnawed at him, sharper than any physical command. For the first time, he wondered if surrender meant losing not just control, but himself. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Ethan arrived at Clara's house, only to find Isabel already there, this time seated in Clara's armchair, sipping wine like she owned the place. Clara stood behind her, one hand resting casually on Isabel's shoulder. Rule number 7, Clara said, her tone colder than usual. When Isabel speaks, you obey without hesitation. Show me you've learned. Isabel leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Kneel. Ethan froze. The command hit differently from Clara's. From Clara, it was law. From Isabel, it felt like mockery. Like theft. I said kneel, Isabel repeated, sharper this time. Clara's gaze burned into him, expectant. Ethan's heart pounded. His pride screamed against it. His jealousy roared. But Clara's silence was heavier than both. Finally, trembling, he sank to his knees. The satisfaction in Isabel's smile stung more than any punishment. Clara's approval, however subtle, was the only thing that steadied him. That night, Clara dismissed Isabel earlier than usual. When the door closed, Ethan finally spoke. Why her? Why do you need her here? Clara studied him for a long, unblinking moment. Then she stepped forward, her hand cupping his face. Because surrender isn't real until it's tested, she said softly. And you, Ethan, you're not done being tested. Her thumb brushed his cheek, tender despite her words. One day soon, you'll understand. Or you'll walk away. But make no mistake, until that day, you belong to me. Ethan closed his eyes, torn apart inside, yet more bound to her than ever. Ethan learned that the hardest truths rarely arrived loudly. They came like winter light, sharp, inevitable, and impossible to ignore. By the time spring edged the town awake, the pattern of his life had changed. He no longer measured his days by classes or part-time shifts but by the rhythm of their meetings, by the small rituals Clara demanded and the larger silences that followed them. Isabel had become a steady, unpredictable presence, sometimes absent for weeks, sometimes slipping into the house as if no time had passed at all. Whatever the arrangement was between the two women, it wasn't something Ethan would pry open with clumsy questions. Not anymore. Still, the ache of not knowing had not healed. It had transformed, less raw, more considered. He understood now that the edge of surrender cut both ways. To give himself over to someone else required a secret reservoir of self he had only just begun to find. One evening, Clara invited him with a note more formal than the usual scribbles: Saturday, 9 p.m. Wear something comfortable. Bring your patients. There was a small star drawn in the corner, the only concession to warmth. When he arrived, the house smelled of lemon and old books. Clara greeted him at the door in a linen shirt and no pretense. Isabel was already there, perched on the window seat with a teacup in her hands and the faintest smile on her lips. The atmosphere felt different, less play and more intent. You look tired, Clara said, voice soft. I am, Ethan admitted. But I'm here. Isabel set her cup down carefully. Good. Come, sit. He obeyed, sitting in the chair opposite them. Clara took the lamp's warm light and placed it between them so their faces were honest, without shadow. For the first time in months, neither woman tested him with petty punishments or coy commands. Instead, for a long time, they simply watched. You've changed, Isabel said finally, and her voice lacked the teasing edge Ethan had come to expect. It was plain, almost gentle. I thought I had to change, he said. To be better. Clara smiled, but it wasn't sharp. There's a difference between changing and becoming, she said. Change is a thing that happens to you. Becoming is something you choose. He let the distinction settle into him. Isabel leaned forward. We need to tell you something. It's time. Ethan felt his chest tighten. His mind rehearsed a dozen outcomes, each one barer than the last. He braced. Clara took a breath that seemed to steady the air itself. Isabel and I have history, she said simply. Long ago, we were partners. It was different then. It's different now. But the truth is this, we both care for one another. We also care for you. This isn't a game or a test to break you. It's been a way to teach you honesty with yourself, what you want, what you fear. But we haven't been honest enough about what it means for us. Ethan listened. Her words were steady, not a confession of guilt but a map. Isabel added, we never meant to hurt you. If we did, it was because we forgot to consider your heart in the middle of our rules. That admission landed on him with the weight of rain. For a time he simply breathed, tasted the honesty like something rare and sweet. You could have asked me before, he said finally, not accusing so much as honest. You could have told me what you were doing, why you brought her in, what she meant to you. Clara reached out and took his hand, no ceremony, no lecturing. A small, human touch. You're right. We should have. Ethan drew in the gesture like air. I don't want to be toyed with, he said. I don't want secrets. I wanted lessons, yes. But the lessons have to be fair. Isabel's gaze softened. Then let this be a lesson in fairness, she offered. Tell us what you want, Ethan. Not what you think we want to hear, but what you actually want. For the first time in the relationship's slow spiral, a question was asked that didn't hinge on obedience. It required him to be brave in a different way, vulnerable because it was voluntary. He thought of nights on the floor, the ribbon cutting into his skin, the stinging taste of humiliation and the more complicated taste of belonging. He thought of the way Clara's hand soothed him after a harsh lesson, of the electric curiosity behind Isabel's eyes. He also thought of his own boundaries, what he could tolerate, what he couldn't, and what he genuinely wanted. I want to be trusted, he said at last. I want you to tell me what you want from me and give me the space to say what I want in return. I don't want secrecy. I don't want to be used as entertainment. I want honesty. And I want choice. Clara and Isabel exchanged a look that wasn't a conversation in words but in something older, a negotiation of history and feeling. Clara nodded. That is reasonable, she said. You deserve clarity. Isabel smiled, an expression without irony. And I want you to be happy here, she said. If that means changing how we operate, we will. They spoke then, slowly, deliberately, and not in the clipped cadences of teacher and pupil but in the measured tone of adults deciding how to share a life. They laid out a new framework, no surprises without consent, no public risks that could endanger his reputation, scheduled times when Isabel could be present after Ethan had agreed, safe words and ways to stop anything that felt wrong, regular check-ins where all three could speak honestly. The rules were no less structured than Clara's original edicts, but their purpose shifted. They existed to protect, not to punish. To bind, but gently. When they finished, the air in the room felt cleaner, less electric with trickery, more alive with possibility. Ethan slept like a man who had passed an exam he had set for himself. He woke the next morning with a sense of being newly minted, as if the old pattern had been burned away and something more honest had been forged in its place. There were moments of pain that followed. Old habits died slowly. On his next visit, he flinched at a playful tug from Isabel. On another, he fought the reflex to obey every unilateral instruction with fearful haste. But the difference was the space between impulse and choice. He learned to pause, to breathe, to voice discomfort. He surprised himself when Clara listened. The weeks that followed were not seamless, but they were real. They negotiated boundaries like a treaty, and sometimes they broke them and came back to the table like adults who had learned trust takes work. Clara remained the stern, elegant woman Ethan had fallen for, her lessons now tempered by care. Isabel remained sharp and playful, but studied her lines before she spoke them, mindful of how easily delight could slip into hurt. And in the quiet between tests, something tender blossomed. It was not the fevered, all-consuming surrender Ethan had once imagined surrender to be. It was a softer surrender, one chosen each morning by consent, each evening reaffirmed. He learned that yielding did not nullify him, it was an act of strength when it was freely given. The final true test came not as punishment but as a quiet asking. One night, with the rain beginning its soft summer percussion, Clara took his hand and held it as if she meant to never let go. "Will you stay?" she asked. Her voice trembled barely and Ethan heard the human line behind the teacher's armor. It was the same question he had been asking himself in the small hours for months. It was not simply whether he would remain in their dynamic, but whether he would accept the way they loved, messy, complicated, and generous when it had to be. He looked at both of them, at the woman who had stripped him of pretenses and at the woman who had shown him how desire could be shared, and for the first time, he saw their faces clearly, without the masks of authority or play. He saw vulnerability. He saw care. He saw choice. Yes, he said after a long breath. I will stay. But on my terms, too. We do this together. Clara's eyes glistened, and Isabel's grin became something like relief. They folded into him like a family finding its shape. What followed was not the end of lessons but the beginning of a different kind. They learned to build rituals that honored all three of them. There were nights of tenderness where they simply read aloud to each other, hands touching in casual comfort. There were nights of sharper edges, consensual, negotiated, where trust was tested and, often, strengthened. There were mornings when Ethan cooked coffee for the two of them. There were afternoons when they walked through the college's gardens and argued about books. Wordless moments counted as much as words. A hand on a shoulder in the library. A text in the middle of the day asking whether he was okay. A look exchanged across a crowded room that meant, I remember our agreement. They became less a teacher and student and more three adults who had chosen one another, flawed and complicated and careful. When Ethan finally graduated from his last course, he did not stand alone. Clara and Isabel sat in the third row, discreet and proud. He felt their presence like an armor and a bomb. In those seconds, as a bell rang and diplomas were handed, he realized something essential. Surrender had never been about giving himself away. It had been about finding the courage to be honest, the bravery to ask for what he needed, and the wisdom to accept love in a form he had never imagined. Years later, when people asked him about those months, the tests, the ribbon, the humiliation, and the tenderness, he would speak differently depending on who asked. To friends, he would smile wryly and say it taught him discipline. To those who knew what it meant, he would say something truer, that the greatest lesson had been learning how to ask, to refuse, and then to choose. To love, on terms that honored himself and the people he loved. Clara and Isabel remained a part of that life, not to define him, but to widen it. They kept teaching in the strict, exacting ways only they could, and Ethan kept learning no longer for grades, but for a life that was unabashedly his. The last sentence of the last lesson Clara taught him, spoken late one night with a candle guttering between them, stayed with him. Surrender is not losing yourself. It's the truest place you can find who you are. Ethan held her hand, and this time, he knew precisely what surrender could be, an offered choice, received with respect, returned with care. And in that knowing, he found home.